I don't usually talk about that Christmas. It's been years, but every time the lights start going up, I think about it again. Back then, I was living in a half of a duplex just outside of Minneapolis. It wasn't much, old wallpaper, creaky floors, but it was quiet. I'd just come out of a messy divorce, and the silence was what I needed. The woman in the other half was named Mrs. Miller. She was in her 70s, short, always put together, and the kind of neighbor who noticed if your garbage cans blew over in the wind. We didn't talk much, but she seemed kind. She'd wave when I got the mail, sometimes offer me a slice of cake she'd baked. She told me her son visited once a week, usually Sundays, to bring her groceries and shovel the steps. Their little routine was so steady, it became part of mine. Every Sunday, I'd hear the scrape of his shovel out front, the sound of their voices through the wall, then the car starting up an hour later. It was comforting in a way, something familiar in a life that had stopped feeling familiar. That winter came in hard. It started snowing in early December and barely stopped. By Christmas week, everything was buried. Cars, mailboxes, half the fences. The street went quiet, like the whole neighborhood had gone to sleep. A few days before Christmas, I started noticing something strange. I was home most of that week before Christmas, working remote, barely going out. That's probably why I noticed it first. Her lamp. Every evening, around the same time, the light from her living room window spilled faintly across the snow outside of our houses. I'd gotten used to it. It was always there, warm and steady, until midnight or so, then gone. But a few days before Christmas, it stayed on all night. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she'd fallen asleep watching TV. But the next night, it was still on, and the night after that. I remember standing at my kitchen window one of those nights, just staring at that glow on the snow. It felt strange, that quiet, constant light, surrounded by all that stillness. Her son's car hadn't been there all week. I started to wonder if maybe he'd gone out of town, but her steps hadn't been cleared either. The snow was smooth from her door all the way to the sidewalk, untouched. By the 23rd, I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. I went over, knocked, waited, nothing. I tried again, louder, still nothing. The house was silent, not even a dog barking, no sound of a TV. Her mailbox was full, flyers and letters spilling over. I stood there for a while, debating whether to call someone. I didn't want to overreact. She was older. Maybe she'd gone to stay with family. But the light, that steady light through the curtain, just felt wrong. I called her son. His number was still taped on the box, in case of emergency. It rang until voicemail. I left a message, saying I was worried. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking through the window, telling myself I'd see the lamp go off any minute. It never did. Christmas Eve morning, the snow was still falling, light but constant. Her car sat exactly where it had for weeks, half buried. No tire tracks, no footprints, no shovel marks. I called her son again. Still nothing. So I finally called the non-emergency police line. 2 officers came out that afternoon. They were polite, professional. I told them I hadn't seen her since last week. They knocked, called her name, and then one of them forced the door. I waited in my kitchen, watching from behind the curtain. They were in there a long time, at least half an hour. I remember the stillness when they came out. They didn't look alarmed exactly, just quiet. One of them came over and asked when I'd last seen her. I told him maybe a week. He thanked me for calling and said someone would contact me later. That was all. That night, for the first time in days, the lamp was off. I remember feeling two things at once: relief and guilt. Relief because it finally looked normal again. Guilt because I was glad I hadn't found her myself. The next morning, Christmas Day, I was making coffee when I saw a car pull into her driveway. It was her son. He looked pale, exhausted. He came to my door a few minutes later and thanked me for calling. He said she'd been declining for a while, and at least it had been peaceful. He didn't say much else. He went inside and stayed for hours. I figured he was cleaning up or packing her things. That evening, when I looked out the window, her lamp was back on. I told myself he must have left it that way, maybe to make it easier to go in and out after dark. But the days passed, the light stayed on, and I started hearing things through the wall. Faint, ordinary sounds. The scrape of a chair, the dull thud of something dropped, floorboards creaking in slow rhythm. I told myself it was the pipes. The house was old. It was easy to explain. A week later, the landlord called to ask if I'd seen anyone using her side. He said the power company reported steady usage, even though the place was listed as vacant. I said no, I hadn't seen anyone. He hesitated for a second, then said, "All right, I'll check next week." After that, the noises got less frequent, but every night the lamp stayed on. It became background, the one spot of warmth in all that darkness outside. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it longer than I meant to. In January, there was a brief thaw. For a few days the snow softened, turned to slush. Every yard on the block was patchy and wet, except hers. Her steps, her driveway, her yard, still frozen solid, untouched. I remember standing by the window one night, looking out, trying to figure out why that bothered me so much. I couldn't explain it, but it did. When I moved out in March, the light was still on. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to know the answer. A few months later, I ran into the landlord at the grocery store. He said my place had new tenants now, and that everything was working fine again. I didn't ask what he meant. That night, I walked past the house out of habit. The snow was melting, but the steps on her side were still covered, untouched, like no one ever used them. Through the curtain, I could see the glow of a lamp, but as I kept walking, I realized it looked exactly the same. Same color, same faint flicker on the wall, and for some reason, that bothered me more than anything else. Thanks for watching No Sleep Tonight, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps this channel grow and keep these horrors coming. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, sleep well.